So we are going to be talking about the magic of native plants, and especially creating that ecologically functional landscape. And so I have been, just for a little background, been gardening my entire life. My dad taught me and set the example. I've gardened with my grandparents and my other family members, and I love it. And then I went to school for these sciences and conservation, and really fell in love with all the critters that inhabit these spaces. Um, However, I was also, like many of you maybe, really enchanted by some of these really interesting different colors of foliage and different types of plants. And so my garden, when I first started at my own space, was filled with both some native plants, but a lot of non-native plants. And so I want this space to be a safe place for those of you who are just starting to dip your toes into native plants, to understand that you can make some really significant changes that require very little work, but make a big impact. And so even if you are not at the point where you have a fully native garden on your property, just adding a few things and taking away some of the bad actors can make a big difference. Please, this is about learning some new things, and when we learn better, we can do better. So, what is an ecologically functional landscape? It's one that supports all areas of our ecosystems, our local ecosystems. And plants really provide the basis for that. So while much of my talk is going to be about plants, you're going to notice a lot of insects, and you will hear me talk about some of the other animals and areas that those plants and insects support. So right here up on the screen, I'm going to be referencing that garden that you see in the upper right-hand corner. This is just one of the gardens in my small suburban lot. So I should put that out there. I live in suburbia, my husband and I and our dog, and we don't have much space to work with. We do maintain some portion of turf so for our dog and for us, but we've really tried to eliminate and reduce those lawn areas as much as possible over the years. And so they continue to, every year I feel like I take a little bit more away. So poor little Dexter, he's just going to have to figure it out here. But here on the screen, a couple of little critters that are common in my yard. I want to draw some attention though down to the bottom left-hand corner, because does anybody happen to know, and you can pop it in the chat if you know, what this cute little lady is called, that little insect that's on that's nectaring on a late boneset flower? Anybody know who she is? One of the most fun things about starting to understand how our spaces fit into our local ecosystems is discovering who comes to visit when we start adding these plants to our gardens. And oftentimes, if you're not already a giant insect lover like I am, it can be a little scary. And so I recognize that. What I want to encourage you to do, though, is to be curious. And you'll hear me mention that a few times tonight. Be curious about who's visiting. This little lady has a great story. This is a fraternal potter wasp, like potting, Potting. And at first glance, if you're not very familiar with some of our solitary wasps, you might think, wow, that looks like a bald-faced hornet because it's colored the same. Well, turns out lots of our solitary wasps are black and white or black and yellow, just like our community wasps, like bald-faced hornets or some of our different species of yellow jackets. Those community nesters, those little community nesting wasps are the ones that sting to defend. And so that is often where there's wasp-human conflict, because they're defending their nests, because they're working together as a community. But by and large, the majority, like vast majority of our native wasp species are just like this little lady. She is a solo operator. She provisions her own nests. Once she is fertilized, she is like, that's, she's on her own, and she's gonna provision her nest. And in the process, she's going to be great pest control for us. So I have a little story about her. She I was sitting on my deck and I noticed this wasp or an insect. I wasn't sure if it was a wasp flying back and forth across the deck. And so I went to look to see where she kept going behind our grill, and I found this little surprise. And so it was this cute little pot, little clay pot. And inside of it, you can see a little bit of green if you're on a big enough screen. And I watched her, and pretty soon she filled that. And I kept seeing her bring things back, and pretty soon she filled the top of that over and closed it up. So I went and I looked her up, trying to figure out who she was, and realized she's this fraternal potter wasp. And depending on this particular, I have found some broken ones that have had 12 to 14 caterpillars in them. But what she does is capture caterpillars. She uses her stinger to subdue the caterpillar, almost like zombify them, so they're still alive, stuffs them into that little pot, then lays a single egg in that pot, covers the top, and then she goes and starts to build a new pot to provision a new nest. And when that egg hatches, the wasp larva will feed on all those juicy caterpillars until it matures and then hatches out as a new wasp. Really cool. These kinds of little magical moments are happening all the time in our yards. They're happening all the time in our parks, in our forests, in our meadows, in our natural areas. And so once you start to learn about those, you think, my goodness, look what else is happening. But we want these especially in our neighborhood spaces. We oftentimes want our spaces to look really good because the aesthetic is what draws a lot of people to start to the hobby of gardening. And so we want it to look good, but my message to you today is it can look good and it can still be functional. Almost all of the pictures I'm going to share with you today are taken from my garden or the Portage Park District. So I've got a couple in here from the Park District, including the rain garden that we installed at Morgan Park. So this is a functional garden that's capturing runoff from one of our vault toilets and is then treating and holding back some of that storm water, allowing it to slowly infiltrate into the ground instead of running off. And there's some plants that thrive in those types of environments. I encourage you to contact your local soil and water conservation district or Tinkers Creek Watershed Partners if you are interested in adding a rain garden to your yard. Another message I want to make sure that you just get ingrained into your soul is everything is connected, absolutely everything. And so this is a very, very simple example. I love birds. 'Tis the season if you're a birder. I know there's a few of you I saw in there who I know are birders. We are excited because it's migration season. It's really heating up. And then we have these cute little guys, the American robins, that are starting to be more active and territorial in our yards. Robins eat primarily softer insects, worms, berries. Then we've got little chickadees, like the one pictured here. They eat seeds as a big part of their diet. However, all of our songbirds require soft-bodied insects, especially caterpillars, to feed their young, to feed and raise their young successfully. It's the link from the plant to the young bird as it develops. And so there's been plenty of studies done on the black-capped chickadee, and they need approximately 6,000 of those to be able to raise their little babies. It's a whole lot of caterpillars. So I feel like we have an obligation, once you know that information, to start providing some food. Now, I talk to a lot of garden clubs, and sometimes gardeners are like, whoa, I don't want anything eating my plants. I don't want any damage on my plants. And I think that's culturally where we've come from a bit, is that we've tried to install plants that nothing eats. But in doing that, we inadvertently have starved our local ecosystems. So I'm here to tell you that a little bit of munching is not only good, it's great. And so I hope that you'll start looking at your gardens and just hoping for, okay, if nothing is eating this plant, then perhaps I need to consider replacing that plant with something that's going to be functional. So here are some caterpillars that are eating this plant, but sometimes the damage we see on their plants is because we're providing this excellent little ecosystem. This is one of our native leaf cutter bees. She is cutting off little circles of leaves, and she's using that to separate her nest. So they'll usually use a cavity, and she will use leaves or other plant material to separate each one of her cells, where her developing larva will be for an entire year hanging out in the garden. So we'll get to why that's important a little bit later. Other bees that we might see are ones like this queen bumblebee. This was taken in my yard a few years ago. It was my first of year queen bumblebee. This is the time of year where we're starting to see them emerge. I saw my first one in the yard yesterday, and they look like giant bumblebees, all different species, but they look really, really big this time of year. That's because the bumblebee life cycle is such that the queen, at the end of the growing season, so last year, there were a number of queens that were born, and then male bumblebees fertilized those females, and those young queens went and just ate up and got as much nectar and storage as they could for the year, and then they went and found a safe place under leaves or in an animal burrow or underneath logs to be able to overwinter. And so as soon as it starts to warm up, that single queen bumblebee emerges, and she's going to do some nectaring, and she's going to be looking for a place to make her nest. And if that queen doesn't survive, then you're looking at thousands of bumblebees that are fantastic pollinators and so important to our ecosystem, not being present during the next growing season. So don't kill the queens. We want to celebrate them as you start to see them buzzing around. All that they're trying to do right now is find a place to create a nest. And if you're like me and you do a lot of gardening, then you really love having bumblebees around, because their buzz pollination, it does an extra great job of pollinating a lot of our vegetables and fruits. So I'm going to bring the room down just for a moment because we are in a biodiversity crisis on this earth. So if you have not read up on some of the numbers on all different species of animals and plants, it's pretty scary stuff, because we're seeing less and less diversity. And diversity is absolutely an indicator of a healthy ecosystem. So you look at any different type of ecosystem, we are part of those systems as well. Look at any of those ecosystems, and a higher level of diversity equates to a healthier system. The chart on the left shows the breakdown of life on Earth, and you can see that you take all of the other life on Earth, and it's still less than the total number of insects that we've got on this planet. And insects are really crucial to all of our intricate food webs in our local ecosystems and globally. There are a few groups of plants that do a much better job of serving that caterpillar, that Lepidopteran. So Lepidoptera is the moth and butterfly order of insects, and the caterpillars, both moths and butterflies have caterpillars. The caterpillars feed on various plants. Now, some are generalists where they will feed on lots of different types of plants. Other moth and butterfly caterpillars will only feed on very specific plants. Probably the easiest, most relatable example is the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly exclusively, their larvae exclusively feed on milkweed plants. They cannot survive on anything else. But when we look at trees, there are 3 groups of trees that are identified in this area as keystone species, and those are groups that support the highest number of moth and butterfly larvae. So first, we've got the prunus group. So this is like our wild black cherry, our American plum, anything in that prunus genus. The willows, those are the salix. So right now we're seeing willows start to bloom in our area. They are a vital early nectar and pollen source for our insects that are early emergers. And then quercus, or our oaks, all of our native oak trees, they support by far the highest number of Lepidopteran larvae. So oak trees depending on the tree, you're looking at upwards of like 400 to 500 different species of caterpillars that they host. And up on in the top right corner of the screen, you'll see this cute little yellow-rumped warbler that this picture was taken at Dix Park in our Portage Park district by one of our volunteers in December. And if you look to see what's hanging out of its beak is a little caterpillar. And so those caterpillars provide food throughout the year. I want to give you a quick personal example here. This is a northern red oak leaf, and my husband and I had a small red oak that was growing in a place that a location that we needed to move it, and uh, I just out of curiosity wanted to check it out. I mean, it was a young one. It wasn't even I'm not that tall, so it was probably 5'5", 5'5" or 6 foot tall, and I just randomly pulled one leaf down and turned it over, and on the backside of that leaf, in early in the season, this was spring, there were 5 different species of caterpillars on one leaf. Fascinating. So, because of that, I mean, get yourself an oak tree. Get yourself an oak tree if you want to support the birds in your area. And the next few slides, I'm going to go through and just show you some of my personal favorites. These are all flowers that I grow in my gardens, on my property, and just a absolute snapshot of the favorites. I hate picking favorites, but these are the ones that have performed really well for me and that I would recommend to friends who are just getting into native plant gardening. So here on this page, all of these are one of the things I like about them is that they're all early flowering. In fact, my golden Alexanders, which I've been growing for about 4 years in my garden, and I wish I had started earlier. They're not only are they a great plant for pollinators, but they also are a member of the carrot family. So they're a host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly. In fact, I grow dill and parsley, and the black swallowtails seem to prefer the zizia over those other plants. So that's an extra bonus that comes with it. But all 4 of these are nice, lower growing native plants. One of the common complaints I get from people who, try to go hog wild into the native plant world when they're looking for a more formal garden is that they get too tall or they're just out of control. And part of that starts with managing your expectations of what you're doing, but also it's about which choices you're making with your plants. So these are all relatively low growing ones. The penstemon hirsutus, the hairy penstemon that's seen in the top right, that's a really nice low growing plant. I use it along the edges of my sunny beds. Later in the presentation, I have the penstemon digitalis, which is the smooth penstemon, which is taller and has much larger flowers. Here's a video I'm going to show you. This is now because it's the beginning of the year, but just look at all the movement is what if you're on a small screen, you may not be able to appreciate on this one, but just look for there's so much movement happening here because there's tons of little bees and flies and beetles that are utilizing this plant early in the season. It's a magnet for pollinators, in part because there's very few things that are blooming early in the season. Midsummer flowering plant favorites. I saw a few people I saw some milkweed and some cardinal flower, the lobelia. These are some of my favorites. This could be a much larger list because there is a huge number of really cool native plants that bloom in the middle of summer. I do want to spend some time on the lower left-hand corner though and mention milkweed. I saw somebody asked a question about planting milkweed. So there are 3 common native milkweeds that we see in Northeast Ohio, see growing out in the wild. There's a few others that are less common, but these are the ones that are easy to purchase, that are they're readily available. But you want to be careful and be mindful of where you're planting them. So in the center, with the monarch butterfly dripping off of its round, beautiful bloom, is common milkweed, and it smells amazing. It is a magnet for all kinds of insects when it's in bloom, but it does spread pretty aggressively. So if you are looking for if you have a small space, or if you are looking at keeping a more formal look, this is not the milkweed for you to put into your garden. You will be sad. You'll be happy the first year. You'll think this is great. And then the next year you'll be cursing anybody that told you to plant that in your small flower bed, because it will take over. The other two are better behaved, as they're more clumpers. So in the center, the pink flower, that's swamp milkweed, and that milkweed is it's a shorter lived perennial. So you do need to either allow the swamp milkweed to reseed if you want to keep it in the same general area, or just be prepared to replace it after 3 to 5 years. I learned that just a few years ago, because I kept thinking, why is my swamp milkweed dying in my rain garden? And I've had one of my rain gardens I've had for almost, it's been closed now, it's coming up on 20 years. And so I kept thinking, why is this milkweed dying? Well, it's just because it was done with its life cycle. So it is a perennial, but it is a shorter lived perennial. Then the orange butterfly weed, which those are fritillaries, one of our species of fritillary butterflies that are nectaring on it. These prefer full sun and much drier conditions. But gosh, you can't beat that flower. So beautiful, and it just pops against everything else in the landscape. Quick little note on the fritillaries: if you love the butterflies that are in that group, you need to have violets planted somewhere, because that's their only host plant. So just a note for what the food that you're providing for your critters. One of my most favorite native plants is mountain mint. There's a couple different varieties that are native to this area, and it is a magnet. And it blooms for a really long time. And do not be afraid of the fact that it's a mint. In fact, a lot of the native plants that you're going to see pictures of today are actually in the mint family. This is not like our culinary mint where it's going to take over your garden. This plant can get rather tall if it's in a really happy spot. If that's the case, you can do one of two things. You can either cut part of it back mid-year. I don't like to cut them back completely, because there are insects that have co-evolved with the bloom time of the mountain mint, so you don't want to deprive them of that nectar and pollen source. But if you want to sort of allow them to have that nectar and pollen, but also keep the plant itself a little bit shorter, you can cut half of it, and then you'll get a slightly later bloom, but it won't get quite as leggy. The other option, this is what I choose to do, is I just use some staking around it. So as it's growing, I get some stakes that I put around there just to support it. So once it gets large, it's able to stay upright. But fantastic plant, and it will bloom even if you don't do a mid-season cut. It will bloom up into the fall. A beautiful, beautiful plant. Late flowering plants, these are really important. Just like the early ones are important to incorporate in your garden, the late ones are also important, because now you've got a whole new set of insects and birds and other wildlife that are relying on late season pollen and nectar. And so these are some examples of the ones that I think everyone should have. The only one that I'm going to caution you on here is the mist flower can be pretty aggressive. What I have found with aggressive native plants is that put the ones that are less aggressive into your gardens first, let them get established, and then you can add some of those more aggressive ones, and the other plants will keep them in check. That was my strategy with the mist flower. I added it later to the garden, and there just is less space for it to move. And so it fills in a lot of those lower areas. And there's very few plants that we have that are native that have that blue color. The reason it's got kind of a lime green foliage is because this particular one is planted in full sun. It'll have a darker green foliage if it's planted in a shadier environment. I want to point out goldenrod. I think everyone should have goldenrod for a bazillion reasons in your yard, but do know that some of them are way more aggressive than others. The one pictured in the lower right is stiff goldenrod. This is my favorite for smaller gardens. It's got a more clumping habit, and I've not experienced the movement and the spreading that some of my other goldenrod species exhibit. So it's a really nice addition. Bone set, common bone set is, I'm going to show you a video. I mean, talk about a magnet. If you are looking to get pollinators, I know we see the wasps and the bumblebees here, but if you really look closely, you'll see lots of tiny little insects that are buzzing around. And here's the deal. Everybody that's here, even our paper wasps and our bald-faced hornets, we've got mud daubers and things, they're not interested in stinging, but even our community bees and wasps that are here are completely uninterested in us when they are nectaring. They're not by their nest right now. They are not interested in defending. They are solely focused on having a sweet treat. Quick little note: bees do eat pollen. That's where they get their protein from. Wasps generally eat. They're carnivores, so they eat other insects, and so they're getting their protein from other animals. And they all, though, love a little sweet sugar. So that's what they're getting from the nectar when they're visiting. And you'll see some flies and beetles on there as well. But gosh, common bone set. I know this feels like a hard turn away from plants, but this is an intentional slide. There was a point in time where all of these hairstyles were considered culturally preferred. So there were choices made. Well, we've moved away from that now, right? And I would argue that and I'm hoping that we're moving away from this, that this is the cultural norm for some communities. And I'm hoping that, and if this is your current norm, it know better, do better. Okay. So this is an absolute wasteland for insects. I mean, they're just not there. And if the insects aren't there, then our birds are not there, our other animals are not there. And oftentimes, in order to maintain this, we use a lot of water resources. We also are applying fertilizers or chemicals. And those very things that we're doing to create this lawn are the things that are diminishing our insect populations in
Are
our
you going
local
out the door right now?
ecosystems.
Okay.
And so here we have, I'm gonna pop a few things up on the screen here that hopefully I will tell you the ones that I've had. Okay. So, and I feel like I worked in landscaping through high school and part of college. And I feel like I'm doing my penance now, teaching people how to remove, which plants to remove after I planted a zillion burning bushes in while I was in that role. So this little jerk on the screen here is the ornamental pear, and the ornamental pear trees are one. This tells you how bad they are. We've got a whole list of invasive species, and I'm sure if you at the previous webinar, I talked a little bit about some of our invasives, and I'm sure this one was on the list. So you think of the giant list of invasive species that are problematic to our ecosystems. Only one of those is illegal now to plant and grow and sell in the state of Ohio. It's that bad. And this is the ornamental pear tree. It is always ornamental pear pruning season, and the best way to prune it is to get all the way down to the ground, cut it right off, paint that stump, and yeah, please take them out. I will tell you this in my neighborhood, this is so problematic. And there is hope. You can convince your friends and neighbors to remove these guys. Sometimes it takes 18 years or so, but you can do it. I've had a number of neighbors that over time have made the choice to remove these from their landscape. And it really makes a difference. But wow, we have so many that are out there, and it just hurts my heart this time of year. Spring is my favorite time of year, and those little suckers you really, really bring it down. Also, we've got the burning bush. It is gorgeous. The burning bush is gorgeous. In fact, this was the last invasive plant or non-native plant that I removed from my yard because my husband loves them. But it just does too much harm than good. So our goal here is to do no harm. So we have to be, even if it hurts our little hearts, we've got to take out the things that are doing harm to the very ecosystem that we're trying to enhance and build. Uh, This is barberry. This is the purple variety. There's, of course, a green variety. I can tell you from personal experience working for the park district that we see, especially at some of our wooded areas, if anybody's ever been to Towner's Woods, you'll see both burning bush and barberry sprouting up in the woods and in areas that are incredibly far away um, from communities. So barberry in particular, ticks seem to love it. So once it gets into the forest ecosystem, I pick up the most ticks when I'm walking through a woods that has a lot of barberry that has creeped in. And then there's a whole list of honeysuckles, non-native honeysuckles. They're beautiful. They smell great. They are the things that are starting to bud out right now. Like when you see the green I was out at one of our parks yesterday, you see that green starting to leaf out, it's more than likely a non-native or an invasive plant species. I don't want to leave you though without options. So I'm going to go through a few options. If you have some of these little guys that you are going to take out and you want to replace them, this is nine bark. It's a beautiful shrub. I'll show you some other pictures later in the program. And burning bush, a great alternative is blueberry for that red fall color. So many spring white flowering trees are available. This particular one is one of the crab apples, but serviceberry and American plum, they will give you that same early spring color, but they'll be doing good things instead of bad things. And for barberry, a good replacement is inkberry holly, which is one of our native hollies. If you absolutely have to have something with a red color, this is a variety of nine bark. It's not going to support the insect species in the same way, but it's certainly better than having a barberry in your yard. So when we're doing site selection and design for our gardens, for our native plant gardens, use the same types of considerations as you do for a traditional garden. So we look at height and bloom time and their soil needs. The cool thing about native plants, though, is that they are so hardy. Like they got this. You've got clay soil, there's a plant for that. You've got some dry sandy soil, there's a plant for that. You have soil that you haven't been able to get anything from the nursery to grow on. I bet there's a native plant for that. They are designed to live. They've co-evolved in this area. They're designed to thrive here. This garden that I just showed previously, this is a picture of it. This is when it looks the worst. So this is, or at least that's what my husband would say. I think it looks awesome. But this is before I've edged. This is an early spring. We're just seeing, you can see on the left-hand side, the zizia starting to bloom. Everybody's starting to come up. You see last year's stems still standing. Summer comes, and in the background there, that's that same garden. I have a rain garden that's up in the foreground here. Later in the season, we've got the asters that are starting to bloom. This is before our goldenrods come in. This is what it looks like in the fall. I just want to note real quick in case I forget to mention it later. I do rake my leaves into the flower beds. But beautiful in the fall. That orange color is that common nine bark shrub. And then this was just in March when we had that lovely little March snowfall. So this is what it looks like in March. And I love how purple coneflowers look. This was early. This was the first snow of the year this year, how purple coneflower seed heads look. And I was out at Trail Lake Park yesterday and had to snap this picture to include, because here we have on the left the common teasel, which is a naturalized non-native plant that in some of our natural areas can get incredibly aggressive, and our natural areas team will take action to get those removed. But notice the seed heads are all totally intact. But if you look right next to it, there are the seed heads of the purple coneflower plant that was right next to it, and they are completely bare because the birds have used that as their winter feeder. So you can do that in your yard too. Save the stems, please. Don't cut them down because there's lots of good. They're going to go away shortly. So as soon as those plants all start to grow up, you'll see the stems in the bottom left, the stems on the purple coneflower and the stems on the monarda are both visible. And then just a few couple weeks later, you've got blooms and you've got no stems in sight. But those stems are there still serving a purpose, and that purpose is for some of our stem nesting insects like this small carpenter bee who use those spaces. She will lay her eggs in those. They will overwinter for the one full year. So that's why it's important not to take them out of your garden. because there's little babies that are in there. And then the next year, they're going to hatch out and pollinate your plants and contribute to that ecosystem. So you're like on a 2-year cycle plan. So do not take those suckers out because there's probably some baby bees that are in there. Instead of doing a traditional mulching, consider planting plants in tighter spaces to be able to act as that natural mulch. I just took this photo this morning, actually. This is fox sedge, which I have in a number of my gardens, and I've just let it sort of, in some of my gardens, it's used as a border, but then I've also let it spread up into the garden. There's lots of native sedges that provide host or act as host plants for some really cool moths and butterflies, and they can be that ground cover for you. This is a really excellent book that talks about this. It goes into much more detail than I have time to tonight about using plants for mulching and converting traditional lawns to prairie ecosystems. Leaving the leaves, we hear that a lot, but why? Well, we've got these really amazing insects. These are just two that are of many that utilize those leaves throughout the winter to be able to overwinter. The morning cloak butterfly overwinters as an adult. So if we're not providing those spaces for these insects to be able to overwinter, they can't complete their life cycle the next year, and they can't lay their caterpillars, their eggs that turn into caterpillars that feed our birds. Um, One of my most favorite tips to share with people, stick some logs in your garden. Some piles of logs are incredible overwintering spaces and little nurseries for our insect community. It's also a place for other animals to go and forage for food. And you can tuck them away so they're not visible, or so the pile up in the top left literally has been tucked away in the back, back behind plants. I promise if you came to visit my garden, you would not see it at all. And I've got lots of those that are hidden away. And then I have some that I think are just really interesting ones. This particular log last year, I moved it a bit, and while I was weeding out some editing editing some plants out of that area, and I found a little halictid bee who was overwintering in there. I was not expecting that. This photo was taken today of a log that I just out of curiosity peeled one little tiny bit of bark back and found a click beetle that was hanging out, resting underneath that bark. And then this was a log, whoops, this was a log that, let me play this video. Turn your, you might even be able to hear the munching. This is a mason bee that was in a log actually at one of our parks. So that was not, but it was just you can see some extra holes that are in there too. There was a whole bunch of them that were provisioning their nests. Excuse me, nests. Cues for care. This is for those of you who have neighbors who are not sold on native plants or have spouses or partners who are not sold on native plants yet. You can use some cues for care to help make that transition from a non-native cultivated garden to a native garden design. Providing structure is really important. I use edging a lot. I do clean edges, and I only mulch along the edge. I don't use mulch in the bed. I just use mulch around the edges, and it's completely aesthetic. Using fencing or foundational plants. There's the Portage Soil and Water Conservation District on their website. Currently, they've got some really nice combinations of trees and shrubs. So if you just want to go with a woody bed and want to do some ornamental natives, they have some excellent examples of things that you can do. Before I go through, I'm going to end with just some cool pictures and videos, but I just want to remind you, first and foremost, look at your space and do no harm. Remove those invasives, those known invasives. And don't make choices. Do your research before you're popping new plants in. Consider planting some of those keystone species. And then, among other things, share with the people around you, share with your native neighbors, let them know what you're doing, and be constantly curious because there is so much amazing activity that's happening in our gardens. This is I was sitting on my deck and I noticed that there was a lot of buzzing going on, and I actually laid underneath my my deck chair and caught some video of these sweet little mason bees. That little ball that you see her carrying is what we call bee bread. So it's a combination of pollen and nectar. And so what she will do is put that, this is just on repeat, so we don't have a whole line of bees that are going in there, okay? So what she'll do is put that little bee bread into a cavity. She'll lay an egg on it, and then for this species, she will take mud and will make a wall. So the leaf cutter bee does the same thing, but instead of using mud, they use plants to separate those walls. Here's a lovely little bumblebee in that Penstemon digitalis, the smooth penstemon. I mean, how bee butts. How cute are bee butts? And so this is an early spring plant that you can add to your yard that's going to really help them out. I have to share with you partridge pea. If you're putting a brand new garden in, or if you're struggling with weeds in your gardens, in your native plant gardens, that's my old dog that's lurking in the background there. um, Partridge pea is just a fantastic plant to add. It's a nitrogen fixer, it's a legume, it's an annual, so it will reseed and continue to thrive, but it's not going to take over your yard because it's going to be outcompeted by some of your perennial plants once they get established. And then I think this is my last video, and then I've got a couple other slides for you. This was a nice little find. If you're familiar with Monarda, this is a variety called raspberry wine. This cultivar gets used in a lot of, this was part of the phenology garden, the original phenology garden design from OSU. It's been in my gardens for years. It gets just about as much visitation as my wild bergamot, another Monarda, does. And I just happen to be, what I do for fun during the summer, one of the things is to like just sit in my garden and watch and see what's happening. And so I was doing that, and I noticed this cute little wasp who's only about a half an inch in length. Zoom underneath. I love the photo bomb of the honeybee. Zoom underneath this bloom and pull out this tiny little caterpillar. And so she pulls out the caterpillar. She stings the caterpillar, and there's a longer video that shows how she subdues it and then flies, straightens it out, flies away. And I identified this one. This little wasp is called a crevice mason wasp. And she actually uses the little holes in rocks and crevices in sidewalks to provision to as nesting spots. I mean, nature is wild. So a couple little quizzes just to wrap up here. Does anybody know what this handsome little larva is? If you know, just pop it into the chat. So this handsome little larva looks like this as an adult. It's our green lacewing, and it's a fantastic predatory insect to have in your garden. One neat thing about that larva, without any camouflage, it looks like the top left picture, but one of the things it does in order to trick its prey is that it will stick the carcasses of its prey on its back so it can move freely amongst all the things that it's looking to eat. So it's a great aphid. If you have aphids, just wait a week. If you've created an ecologically functional garden, I had this experience a couple years ago where the aphids were out of control, and I thought I was going to have to come out with my hose and spray them off. And I said to myself, Jen, practice what you preach. Just wait for a moment. And I waited, and a week later, hardly any aphids because all of the predatory insects had come in and had taken care of it for me. So just be patient. This kind of creepy little larva turns into this beauty. This is the swamp milkweed beetle. This kind of interesting critter, and there's a few different species of this. They all look a little bit different. The clue is that it glows. This is the larva for one of our firefly species. And they, in particular, one of the reasons that we're seeing a decline in lightning bugs or fireflies is that their larvae they live in the soil. They're a beetle that lives in the soil, like many of our beetles, in their larval form. And with our lawns, with the fertilizer, with the pesticides, with the removal of the leaves, they really require that leaf litter in those areas, those clean areas, to be able to thrive. And just before I wrap up, I wanted to show you some of the cool things that can happen when you choose to start adding native plants to your garden. 'Tis the season for spring peepers, and what could be cuter than a little spring peeper that's all nestled up in the leaf gall of a goldenrod plant. So that little rosette that's there is actually a gall that is created by another insect laying its eggs in the developing plant. Um, X marks the spot with spring peepers. So you see on its back is that X. They come in all different colors. They're tiny little guys, but they make a big, big noise this time of year. So I'm sure you've heard them. And the aster flower that you see in the top right, can anyone see the little crab spider that's there? We have lots of different crab spiders. They are ambush predators. They don't make webs, and they hang out, and they can change their color. So the goldenrod crab spider is one that can change. Sometimes it looks white like this, and other times it looks bright, bright yellow to match the yellow of a goldenrod. Down in the bottom here, we've got a ladybug larva. It might look creepy, but that's your pest control. So embrace those when you see them. And then finally, I want to end with a story about this little guy in the bottom right. This is a burying beetle, one of our burying beetle species in the state. And this was actually at a mothing night. It came to one of our nets. And you notice it's got those little critters on top. This is just a cool story about how amazing nature is. Burying beetles they will lay their eggs on top of a dead animal, like let's say a bird. And when they lay their eggs on the bird, their larva will break that down. So they serve a purpose. They bury it underground. The biggest threat to those is a fly larva. And so these little mites that fly on the back, hitch a ride on the back of the burying beetle, are actually the predators of those fly larvae. And so it's a really great relationship where this beetle brings the thing with it that's going to kill the threat to its young developing larva. So wild and crazy stuff. There's lots of resources that are out there. I hope that you will take some time to add some neat native plants to your yard and to help build your local ecosystem. So thanks so much for your time today. And do we have any questions, Christy?
Yes, we do. I just want to say thank you so much for your time and everybody who joined tonight. I'm always amazed when you show your pictures of your yard, especially the one with the sunset, because it just
Ah,
looks so picturesque. And I'm like, how can I ever get there? But you make me feel like I can at least get
you
started.
can totally get there. And that was no filter. That was just like one of those magical days. I happened to look out and I ran to find my phone to take the photo.
We did have a question though. There was a question about what is your favorite native wildflower for shadier spots?
For shadier spots, I love Tiarella. I love foam flower. I think it's just a beautiful, easy to grow, not aggressive, but hardy plant.
Okay, and there's someone in the chat that wants to know how she can see you again. What do you have up and coming next? When will
Oh,
they
that's
see
so
you
kind.
again? Yes.
So if you so if you go to this QR code takes you to our portageparkdistrict.org website, allows you to sign up for our newsletter, which only comes out once a month. I promise I don't spam you. And every the first Thursday of every month. But you can also go to our website under things to do, and all of our upcoming programs will be listed there. So please join us. It'll either be myself or Holly, and we're happy to have you join us.
And I will also say from the Tinkers Creek Watershed Partners, you can go to our website as well and see our upcoming events. We are going to be at the Hudson Earth Day. That's one of our next big up and coming ones. We're going to be doing rain barrel workshops there. So if you don't know what a rain barrel is, you can come and see us. You'll learn more about them, and maybe you'll get to purchase one to take home for your friends and family. We
Nice.
do we do have another question here about ferns. Are those for
Mm.
shade and best for pollinators?
So ferns are a really important part of our ecosystems. They play less of a direct role with pollinators, but they are important. So I think we were on this sort of you had these trends right in conservation, and so we've had like leave the leaves and save the bees, and we there's so much talk about pollinators, but really I use pollinators, and it's sort of like the monarch butterfly, like as a just as an entry into the insect world. So ferns are great for a lot of different insects and animals, and yes, they are definitely a shade plant. I would caution you though to do your research. We have loads of different native fern species, but there are non-native ferns that I see at a lot of the a lot of big box stores and nurseries. So a fern is not just a fern. So you want to make sure that look for that genus and species name. And if it's not there, I wouldn't add it to your yard. And I would do a little research on which ones you want to add. Some of them are harder to source than others.
Very
Jennifer, I have
good.
a question. First of all, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. So I've actually been doing some programming involving installing bee houses and native plants in people's yards.
Yes.
And one of the talking points that I've been hitting on, but I was wondering if you had any recommendations for, was I've been discussing how, the monarch is at the forefront of pushes for getting people to put more natives in, but it seems like milkweed is
Mhm.
consistently the plant people, obviously with it being the host plant, what people are telling people to put in their yards.
Yeah.
But I've been touching on the fact that, the monarchs are here all year. They're not here just when the milkweed blooms. So I've been saying, like it's great to have these milkweed populations, but that's only part of the puzzle piece. And I was wondering if you had any recommendations as far as like species I can recommend people plant as well. Like I don't know if monarchs show a preference for nectaring on certain species.
So, but that's a great question, Matt, and you're exactly correct. I mean, it's wonderful that we have it's wonderful that we have such an interest in providing those larval food sources for the monarch butterfly. Um, but but monarch butterflies as adults need nectar sources beyond milkweed, and just like Matt said, and so butterflies in general prefer blooms that are larger and flatter, ones that they can get on. So I would include things like, I noticed that Joe Pie is a butterfly magnet. Any of the flat flowers, a lot of the cone flowers and the sunflower family, those are all really good for butterflies. I see them use those flowers more readily.
Awesome. Thank
And
you
of
so much.
Sure. And also I would be remiss if I didn't mention asters and goldenrod. Those two also. The thing with asters and goldenrods, and I would say this for anybody that is, if you love monarchs, then plant flowers that bloom, to make sure you've got a native flower bloom that's happening throughout the growing season, especially focusing on those early and the late season. For the monarchs in particular, the late season, like asters and goldenrods, because you're going to not only are they one of the few flowers that are blooming, but they have really nutritious, produce really nutritious pollen and nectar for those animals to fuel up before they take their big flight. So thank you. Good question.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, Melissa, I agree. And bone set. Oh, get some bone set in your yard. You'll be happy.
Any more questions from our group? This is your
I did
chance
just
to get
notice
Jen.
one. What's that?
This is your chance to get to
Oh.
pick Jen's brain.
I did notice one that I don't think I directly answered, which is where do I buy my native plants? And actually, Tinker's Creek may have a online resource for lists. I didn't check, so Christy can pop in here when I finish this. But uh, there Ohio Native Plants Plant Month has some lists. Cleveland Metro Parks has a really great nursery list. The Portage Soil and Water Conservation District has a nursery list on their website. The the good news, the good news, sometimes there's not an abundance of good news when it comes to our local ecosystems. So the good news is when I started my career 20 some years ago, when I would do a native plant talk, I had to start with what the heck is a native plant? I mean, it just wasn't even on the radar. And there certainly wasn't a place that you could go and make purchases of native plants. So there is, oh yes, and a lot of the parks, so Cleveland Metro Parks, Summit Metro Parks, there are lots of parks and nature centers that do native plant sales. Now I'm seeing more garden clubs do native plants, feature some native plants. There's still some growth that can happen there, but there's lots of different areas that different places where you can get native plants now. A little tip, once you start your native plant collection, folks, you do not need to spend a lot of money. I do winter seed sowing every year. I collect from my plants and then I winter seed sow in jugs, which is a whole other topic, but it does two things. It gives you cheap sources of plants to expand your gardens, but it also gives you a lesson in what those seedlings look like. Because occasionally you'll make a mistake like I did and put some brown-eyed Susans in early in your garden and then they really can take over. There are some plants that just can be very aggressive. And so then you get to decide and edit out what what you want and what you don't want. And it's way easier to edit out a seedling than to edit out a larger, more mature plant. So I highly recommend getting into winter seed sowing with your native plants. All right, anything else?
It looks like we got sharing of other up and coming native plant sales.
I love that.
Yes. It's funny that you mentioned that when you were first looking at native plants, they were kind of hard to get the information and education out. Even if you go to Patisse now, there's a whole wall that has paperwork that you can get native plants now. So everybody's
Yeah,
getting
and
on board.
yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, Christy. Another thing to really watch and ask your nursery. If they can't answer you, then that's not the place to to buy your plants. Ask your nursery about things like neonics. Some of the pesticides that are designed to make the plant healthier, but can persist. I mean, those neonics can persist from flower to nectar and pollen to seed to the next plant. And many of our big box stores and commercial growers, they all get these plants from the same places. And if they've been treated with those systemic pesticides, then you're buying it because it has the bee or the butterfly on it and it's a native plant, but then you're planting it and then you're actually poisoning the critters that you're hoping to support. So please just make sure that you're asking questions. So if you're working with a nursery that is specifically for native plants, that's not going to be a problem because they're already, that's part of their mission. But if you're working with a more commercial nursery, that's totally fine. Just make sure you ask questions.